Well, there are plenty of ways of beginning a video about a crazy, crazy race like the British Grand Prix. But I think really I need to start with an explanation of the weather. There I was glibly saying after the qualifying video, of course, Zak Brown and McLaren could know that it's going to rain like crazy on Sunday and they're going to win by 100 miles. And I just sort of scoffed at that because most of the weather forecasts that we were looking at, over 50%, said that by the time of the race start, 3 p.m. local, it would be sunny skies, blue skies, sun would be shining. But then this, of course, is Angleterre. This is England, and McLaren got it absolutely right. It was pouring with rain. It rained from the morning. It never really abated. Yes, there were showers. Yes, there were moments of blue sky and a bit of sunshine, but it was always basically a wet race, starting on intermediates. So, yeah, that's the first point. McLaren did effectively win by 100 miles. They had an unbelievable car in the wet because they were running so much downforce, because it's such a great car anyway. But we saw yesterday how much relative downforce they were running, and it perfectly suited them in the rain. Max Verstappen on the pole, a little bit slow off the line, but managed just to edge into turn one ahead of Oscar Piastri. But Oscar was all over him on intermediates. Yes, there were already safety cars and things going on, but whenever the race was restarted, Oscar was all over Max. It was only a matter of time, 4 or 5 laps, when he was passed with DRS and through into Stowe Corner. And from that point onwards, Max had no chance of beating Oscar Piastri, and his main race then was going to be defending P2 against Lando Norris, and Lando would have got him in the end, but it all went wrong when Max's intermediates went off much faster than the McLarens. We talked about the tyre management situation yesterday, Red Bull versus McLaren, and then it went from bad to worse for Max when he put on the new inters, and then subsequently late in the race when it was dry, he put on a new set of medium slicks and could barely get away from the two Williams of Carlos Sainz and Alex Albon. So a miserable day for Max Verstappen. He did eventually finish P5. I refer to him because he was on the pole. He did eventually finish P5, so you could say from where he was, he had a massive lose on intermediates at a restart. That was where he lost so much time. It wasn't a bad result, but it was a miserable day for a guy who was on the pole yesterday at Silverstone. So let's talk now about the race win for Lando Norris. A British driver in front of the British crowd, his second win in 2 weekends. Talk about momentum building at McLaren. However, it was Oscar Piastri who had the pace. So how did he lose it? Well, he lost it because there was another safety car fracas with Max Verstappen right behind him, as we saw in Canada. Max very annoyed that Oscar suddenly slowed going into Stowe. Another situation like Canada where Oscar then said, I was just passed under the safety car. And on this occasion, the stewards decided to give a 10-second penalty for Oscar Piastri. He was given that news a couple of laps later, by which time McLaren had presumably questioned it with the stewards. And from that moment onwards, even though Lando was behind him, it was race win for Lando Norris. Nothing that Oscar Piastri was going to be able to do about it. But Oscar was not pleased about this, and I can kind of understand why. The 10-second penalty McLaren decided to serve in the pit stop when they went to slick tyres towards the end, both of them going on to a new set of mediums. Now, McLaren didn't have to do that. They could have done a normal pit stop and then allowed the stewards to apply the 10-second penalty at the end of the race. Most teams like to get it done in the pit stop, out of the way, so you can then go racing again. I don't suppose there was that much thought about it. But I think from Oscar's perspective, and we know this because of what he said on the radio, after he'd come out and he was now P2 to Lando Norris, and it was obvious Lando had a massive advantage, Oscar got on the radio and quite surprisingly, and I think quite intelligently, said that whole thing with the safety car was ridiculous. We should be basically appealing that. We should reverse positions now on that basis and then race to the finish, which I can't remember any driver ever saying that. And you got to give him full marks for thinking laterally there. He was the quicker driver over the weekend for McLaren, and there he is being super aggressive on the radio about something like that. And of course, had they not decided to serve that 10-second penalty in Oscar's pit stop and waited till the end of the race, basically then we would have had the race that Oscar was describing. So then in saying that, Lando Norris trying all he can to pass Oscar Piastri, not sure whether Oscar's going to get the penalty or not. Oscar driving flat out, trying to make sure that if he gets the penalty, he's got as much margin as he possibly can. In saying all that, I guess McLaren took the decision to serve the 10-second penalty in the pit stop to avoid any of that team stuff going on, which is why I say from Oscar's point of view, I can understand why he would have been miffed after the race, or during the race, the back end of the race, because it was all done. There was nothing he could do about it at that point. And in his mind, he obviously thinks he did nothing wrong behind the safety car, and it's a point that should be discussed after the race. I think this is the first time we've seen Oscar Piastri, who's a really nice guy, an incredible temperament, looking very annoyed after the race. And I don't blame him for that, because he's a racer, and racers don't like to be given situations where they are the quicker of the two drivers over that weekend. But because of something the team has done, there's absolutely nothing he can do about a weird decision in his mind to do with behaviour behind the safety car. It's not a racing thing, it's just a safety car thing. So that was a really significant moment. It was significant too because of the momentum that Lando Norris is now carrying forward. As I said yesterday, it was a pivotal moment, I think, when he didn't beat Oscar in qualifying. But Lando was just happy and relaxed afterwards, wasn't he? And he's got all that grandstand full of fluorescent green, his colour. And it just looked like he was just going to breeze into the win, which is exactly what he did. He didn't really have to work very hard to win that Grand Prix because, 10-second penalty, that's very easy for him to cover in P2 or from P2. And once he got the lead, he was on slicks, the track was drying, no issue at all. So from Lando's point of view, a very nice win. He'll love this forever. As he said on the radio, British Grand Prix, won by a British driver. For a, should we call it New Zealand, Bahraini, British-based team? I think that's probably what it is now. New Zealand founded. Let's remember Bruce McLaren at this point. Then the other big news, this crazy race. The other big news was that Nico Hulkenberg finished third for Sauber. Now, I'm not going to say yet again, that's the car that Carlos Sainz could have been in. Forget about all that. I've said all that a million times. What I am going to say is this was the first ever podium finish for Nico Hulkenberg. Unbelievably. Talk about deserved. Almost from the back of the grid, as he normally is these days. Drove absolutely superbly. Incredible pressure at the end of the race. And Lewis is on used soft tyres. Nico was on new mediums. Incredible pressure from Lewis towards the end of the race, but no mistakes from Nico at all to finish third. And how is this for a stat? This was the first ever podium finished for Nico Hulkenberg, finished third for Sauber. And for Lewis Hamilton, it was the end of a 12-race consecutive podium finish at Silverstone at the British Grand Prix. And he finished fourth anyway. He's had 2 fourths, actually. He finished fourth to Fernando years ago, 2013, just behind him. And he was nearly third today. So if you include those 2 finishes when he nearly finished third, that would have been 14 consecutive podiums for Lewis at Silverstone. But he didn't get the podium today. And effectively, the run was ended by Nico Hulkenberg. I mean, if you'd done a poll before the race and you said Lewis Hamilton is not going to finish third here, his run's going to come to an end, who is going to take that position from him? I don't think anybody at Silverstone, anybody watching Formula One worldwide would have said Nico Hulkenberg. Well, congratulations to Nico. Top man, amazing racing driver, incredibly versatile in all conditions, very good. He's driven bad cars most of his career, so he knows how to drive reasonably bad cars very, very well. And what a deserved result. And at the same time, Jonathan Wheatley, having gone to Sauber, everything has just gone right. I mean, it's a classic example of when you go to a team that's down, it can only go up. But a lot of that is due to Jonathan Wheatley and some of it to Mattia Binotto as well. But I think Wheatley should take most of the credit. And again, you got to say, one of the really good guys from the whole Red Bull successful era who was allowed to leave. It should never have happened. Well, Red Bull are a very different team now. And what Max will be thinking now about Red Bull and their potential, I don't know. But it wasn't a good day. It wasn't a good day for Red Bull, even though P5 at the end of the day, I suppose, wasn't too bad. So let's go through the results, because it's about all you can on these crazy races. When there were so many safety car interventions, they went from so many different tyre strategies. I think one point I'd just like to make is that when the grid finally lined up and everybody cleared the grid, and it was obvious, everybody was on intermediate tyres. It wasn't actually raining. It was really bad on the last couple of corners of the lap. Nobody from the middle of the grid backwards took the gamble to start on slick tyres. I find that absolutely extraordinary. And it's not the first time we've seen that in Formula One. You would imagine that somebody like, I don't know, Isaac Hadjar or Kimi Antonelli or somebody would think, yeah, let's go for... Oliver Berman, another good example. Well, let's try slicks off the line. Nobody did. They just all had this thing about running intermediates. And, of course, sure enough, they could do the formation lap, and I don't know, 4 or 5 cars immediately come in on the formation lap to change to slick tyres. Now, as it happened, that specific switch to slicks was a waste of time, because it did start to rain again. And as George said, yeah, brilliant decision. Now we have to come in again. But nonetheless, if they're all going to come in on the formation lap, you think some of them would have the gumption to switch tyres on the grid, would you not? Anyway, they didn't, and they never seem to in Formula One. It's just something that I never really understand. And I'm not sure it's something that the teams and the engineers necessarily encourage, but within some teams, there are some drivers should be able to handle slicks in the wet around Silverstone, and some drivers who won't. Who'll put it in the wall, who'll go off for sure. And it's those drivers that have the talent that you definitely should back. Middle of the grid backwards, I think. Otherwise, at the front, it's the James Hunt philosophy. Whatever the guy next to you is on, you've got to be on the same tyres. And that's what happened. No real surprise that they all basically stayed on intermediates at the front of the grid. Into fourth place, Lewis Hamilton, who got swamped a little bit in the early laps, but nonetheless stayed with it and drove extremely well. And if he had confidence after Austria with that pass on George and a few other things, asserting himself with the engineer maybe after the race, he'll have more confidence again after Silverstone. And I think he looked pretty good. And Charles Leclerc in the Ferrari is one of the guys that came in and switched to slicks at the end of the formation lap. And he just had a terrible day. He had moments everywhere, massive moments, whether he was on slicks or cold intermediates, and he just never got it together. He never looked as rhythmic as Lewis Hamilton. He never looked as good on the slow corners as Lewis Hamilton. So a terrible day for Charles Leclerc in the other Ferrari, but a pretty good day for Lewis in front of his home crowd. So Max was P5 and Pierre Gasly, excellent P6 in the Alpine-Renault. One of the worst cars in the race, you got to say, but he managed to get it into the top 10 yesterday in qualifying and was always there. No mistakes from Pierre Gasly. Not a quick car, but he got the absolute maximum from it throughout the race. I've been saying for many months, many years actually, how good Pierre Gasly is. I'd love to see him in a really quick car. But in that Alpine, I don't think anybody could have done a better job than Pierre today. An excellent performance for him to finish P6 behind Max and ahead of Lance Stroll, who it appears almost as if he has a good day, then a bad day, and now it was a good day again, the British Grand Prix. He's pretty good in the wet. He's had some good wet races in the past, but he benefited mainly from coming in. Well, let's go back to square one. He benefited mainly from going to soft tyres, a new set of softs very early in the race when everybody else was going on to mediums, or in the case of Mercedes onto hards. And that's because he didn't qualify well. He didn't get out of Q1, so he had plenty of softs in the garage. So this is a weird irony, isn't it? I suppose a lot of people will say, isn't this great about Formula One that, if you qualify near the back, you go into the race with a lot more tyres that you can play around with, much better chance of matching your tyres to the conditions. Is that a good thing? I suppose it's a contrived thing, a bit like DRS that a lot of people would like, but for me it's tacky. But anyway, as a result of having all these softs in the garage, Lance Stroll did put on a new set of softs, and he made up more time early in the race on the new softs. About lap 10, he was running fifth and potentially heading for a podium finish, and he looked not too far away from that. The problem was he did run that second set of softs at the end when the track dried up. And they went off. They went off right at the end, and Max got him when he ran wide. Pierre Gasly, the same thing. So he lost 2 places in the last 2 laps of the race. But a good drive by Lance Stroll. By contrast, Fernando Alonso, who qualified better, had fewer softs, ran the standard intermediate, medium format of all the leading runners. Couldn't beat his teammate. And again, that's why I say that's a kind of a weird thing. This whole Pirelli era where you have all these limited sets of tyres produces ridiculous results. And Fernando was on the radio saying, I can't believe we managed to get it wrong again, sort of thing. But I guess when he sits down and he looks at it and he sees what tyres he actually had in the garage and what tyres Lance had, he'll realise how it all went wrong for him. He shouldn't qualify as well, Fernando. That's the problem. This is Formula One 2025. Alex Albon then beat Fernando Alonso to the finish. And George Russell, who again, no softs in there, probably no mediums either. Hard, intermediate, hard. Mercedes had him on. Hopeless. Not a great combination. I think the race George had in mind was, when he came in on the formation lap to put the hard slicks on, was it's going to be dry for the rest of the day. I'm going to currently be 14th and I'm going to drive through and win the race. That's obviously what he was thinking, but the rain on lap 10 put an end to all that. And after that, it wasn't a very quick George Russell either. A good battle with Lewis Hamilton for a while. He passed Lewis, but then Lewis repassed him Stowe corner, going into Stowe. Nice pass on George Russell. If you're thinking about passes of the race, a lot of them were sort of DRS induced, but I think that probably is the one that springs foremost to mind. Lewis repassing George and getting a momentum from that to go forward into what eventually became fourth place for Ferrari. So not a good day for George, and not a good day for Kimi Antonelli as well. He was sort of 3 or 4 places behind George and got ahead in pit stops and then gave the position back to George. And then when it was really wet, just before they put the safety car out, vision was absolutely horrendous. A lot of people were sending me messages saying, safety cars, they shouldn't put the safety car out, it's going to ruin the race. I'm just thinking to myself, very few people were at Hockenheim in 82 when Didier Pironi had that horrendous accident, when he couldn't see a thing. And it's the same at Silverstone. You could not see a thing. And we saw that with Isaac Hadjar behind Kimi Antonelli going into Kopp's corner. Absolutely blinded, couldn't see a thing. Antonelli obviously braked early or did something, and Hadjar just went straight into the back of him. Quite a big shunt on the outside of Kopp's. Nobody hurt, fortunately. Brings me back to the 85 Portuguese Grand Prix, of course, when Nigel Mansell started from the pit lane and finished 5th, passing cars everywhere. Terrible spray. I don't think, though, that the spray was as bad then in the 80s as it is now. I think it stands more. It just sits there in the air, whereas from my memory from the mid-80s was that it was like a rooster tail spray, and if you dodged either side, it was relatively clear. But that's not the case in Formula One today, partly because of the diffusers and everything else I guess they have. But it does bring back the memory of Nigel when I was talking to him after the race, saying, how did you do that? How did you do all those passes? And he said, I just listened to the engine note of the car in front, and when the guy backs off, I just move to the left or the right, whatever the next corner was, knowing that all I had to do then was brake a little bit later. And I thought, easy stuff, Nige. But you couldn't do that today, I think. I was wondering whether you could. I don't think you can, because the visibility is so bad. And one of Charles Leclerc's moments, in the middle of Beckett's, high-speed stuff, double 360, was just a massive amount of water. Suddenly got in, hit him in the helmet, right over his visor. Couldn't see a thing in the middle of Beckett's. Talk about hair-raising, talk about frightening. And I can't imagine Charles enjoyed this day at all, and will enjoy not being a Grand Prix driver for the next 3 or 4 days, I would imagine. But one man who will enjoy it is Lando Norris. What a thing, to have won the British Grand Prix by being beaten by your teammate in qualifying, basically beaten by your teammate in the race. Then Max Verstappen, your nearest opponent, spins out of the race and has 2 spins actually. He had 1 spin at a restart on Inters behind Oscar and went down to about 12th, and then trying to get past Sainz, same lap, he had another moment as well. Tyres just not up to temperature, and Max sounding desperate on the radio, saying this car is undrivable, no temperature, all the rest of it. So terrible. But anyway, with all that going on, and Lando taking an easy lead when Oscar's serving his 10-second penalty and cruising around to win the British Grand Prix. What a day. I can say I think he deserves this. He's had a lot of flack. He's had a lot of people say, Lando Norris doesn't have this, Lando Norris doesn't have that. Well, he's won the Monaco Grand Prix and he's won the British Grand Prix. And my old mate Carlos Reutemann used to say, if you're going to win 2 Grand Prix, win Monaco and win the British Grand Prix. For Lando Norris, what a thing, for him to win this race. And for McLaren too. Congratulations to them. What a job they've done. And so just to finish, I think Oscar Piastri, what a character. First guy to congratulate Lando when he gets out of the car. But you can imagine he was not happy after that race. And you wouldn't be if you'd been that quick all weekend, and in your mind you've done nothing at all wrong behind the safety car, and you got to sit there for 10 seconds to let the other guy win. Not a pleasant feeling. And I give him full marks for saying what he did on the radio about let's have a motor race between the 2 of us. And that's a good sign for the second half of the year, isn't it? It means regardless of what happens now with this momentum that Lando's building, that Oscar is not going to let this one go easily. That is for sure. Racer, definitely. So there we go. In closing, a quick reminder about the REC Porsche 956 106B DNA rendition that you can buy. If you have a look at the details in the description below this video, you'll see that it is available in 2 colorways. One of the Canon car, created effectively by Richard Lloyd's GTI engineering company, different chassis engineered by, or a stronger, stiffer chassis engineered by Nigel Stroud, slightly different aerodynamics and brakes as well. That car won the brand's 1,000 kilometers in 1984 in the hands of Jonathan Palmer and Jan Lammers, and then at Le Mans the following year, it finished, well, it nearly won, but it did finish second in the hands of James Weaver and Jonathan Palmer, and also Richard Lloyd had a driving stint as well. It went on to win at Brands again in 86, Liqui Moly version of the car, driven by Manfred Winkelhock and Mauro Baldi. Anyway, we end our trilogy of videos from the British Grand Prix. I'd like to say the British and European Grand Prix. We don't have that title anymore, matched to a national thing, but that's what it was in 1950, of course. It was the British and European Grand Prix. The RAC, British and European Grand Prix, the first ever round of the new FIA Formula One World Championship. And it was at Silverstone because of the work of one individual, of Earl Howe, the fifth Earl Howe. Actual real name was Francis Curzon, very good racing driver. His career completely split by the two world wars, in which he fought honourably in both. And as a parliamentarian as well, a lot of other work he did in his life. But it was his political work behind the scenes when he had retired as a driver, but he was still entering cars. Post-war, he still entered cars for, would you believe, Tazio Nuvolari. Francis Curzon was the man who convinced the royal family that they should attend this British Grand Prix and that it would be the opening round of the World Championship. I think that was sort of juggling, keeping the balls in the air, because if it wasn't the opening round, I'm not sure the royal family would have gone. And equally, he didn't know if they were going to attend or not. But anyway, he was able to go to the FIA and say, the King and Queen of the United Kingdom will be at Silverstone. Of course, this should be the opening round of the World Championship. And so we take our hats off to Francis Curzon, to the fifth Earl Howe, who won Le Mans in 1931 with Henry Tim Birkin, another of the Bentley boys. But they won it in an Alfa Romeo, interestingly, a red Alfa, owned by Francis Curzon. And anyway, we say thanks to him at the end of this video. And we look again at the Roll of Honour from that day, that Saturday in 1950. Thanks for watching. Big thanks to Jetcraft, to OEM Exclusive, to Track Ninja, to REC Watchers, to you the viewer. See you soon.